Morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. I'm very happy to see so many people joining us. We have, I think, over 300 people that registered, so everybody's piling in. My name is Masha Merkulova. I'm the founder, executive director, and a chief Zionist officer of Club Z. Those that live on the East Coast are finally catching up to the West Coast with their graduations of high schools. Last week, there have been many high school graduations on the East Coast where all of a sudden I'm getting a lot of messages from parents, and it's making the news, that student speakers that are addressing graduating clouds are including in their speeches or ending their speeches with a pleas to their fellow classmates to free Palestine from the evil oppression of Israeli occupation. This is where we are. And now the parents in the community are alarmed, and now they want to do something about it. So I would like to suggest just two things. Number one, stop being afraid and speak up. And number two, it's quite simple and quite self-serving. And yes, it is bring Club Z to your community. Sign your kids up, sign your grandkids up. We have to educate and we have to arm, yes, arm our children with tools, with skills, with knowledge, and with chutzpah to be who they are. And that is proud, articulate Jews. I'm gonna play you now a graduation speech from our recent graduation of Club Z, where you will meet a young lady who will take you on her journey. Don't worry, it's only 2 minutes. And if I could please have the video played now.
I joined Club Z in 8th grade against my will, but our unofficial motto definitely rings true. It's the best decision my parents ever made for me, hands down. So I'm just gonna take you through my journey a little bit. I started out Club Z. I was unsure of myself. I really was not confident. I couldn't speak in front of a group, wasn't eloquent, and I leave Club Z having spoken at a rally in front of hundreds of people. Thank you. Defending myself online and at school, going against teachers and classmates. I joined Club Z not knowing what it meant to be a Jew, I'm not religious. Culturally, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the importance at all. But I leave now knowing that I carry on my shoulders a memory and a history and a tradition that I couldn't trade for anything in the world. And I know that I'm a part of a people, and there are strong and resilient people who have lived through just the worst evils of humanity, but who have made it out alive. And I'm immensely proud of that. I joined Club Z with no knowledge about really anything, not Israel, not American politics, not history, and I leave with just an extensive background about Israel and the world in general. And I joined not knowing how to think for myself, just kind of going along with the crowds, following whatever my friends are doing. And I leave now knowing how to critically think, how to form my own opinion, and how to express that opinion thoughtfully. And I have to thank only Club Z. And the amazing people that work here. Masha, first of all, I can't even express my true gratitude. My life is changed forever because of you, and I will always remember you for that. Naya, another fearless educator, truly just everything I know comes from this group of people, and your enthusiasm and your ability to really train us well. And to all the other staff, to Moshe, to Odin, to Ron, to everybody, to Philip, to everybody that participates, that makes every Club Z event just an unforgettable experience. So thank you to everybody. And to grads and non-grads, take this opportunity, grab it, really use it. It'll do you well. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a privilege today to introduce our speaker. And the reason that we really wanted to talk about Jews and power is precisely why Club Z exists and precisely why we are in such a dire straits right now. Ruth Wisse was born in Chernovtsi. So we're going to claim her as a fellow Russian Jew, even though Chernovtsi was, I think, Moldova or Ukraine. She grew up in Montreal, where she was shaped by her family and by her experiences of her family into the powerhouse of the Jewish thought. Professor Wisse has taught at McGill, Stanford, New York, Hebrew, and Tel Aviv universities. While teaching at McGill, she developed a pioneering graduate program in Jewish studies. According to one critic, Weiss's work has been characterized by the sharpness of her insight, by her unwillingness to retreat from a skirmish, and by the inability of even those who disagree with her to deny her brilliance. We definitely need a lot more Ruth Wisse. Recently, Professor retired from her position as a Martin Peres Professor of Yiddish Literature and Professor of Comparative Literature at Harvard, and she is a distinguished senior fellow at the Tikva Fund. Professor Wisse has published many books, and there is a new one that's coming out in mid-September, Free as a Jew, a personal memoir of national self-liberation that can be advanced ordered on Amazon. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my huge honor and my pleasure to welcome Professor Wisse and also our very own Professor Naya Lecht. Naya is our Director of Education. She is a professor of Russian literature, and I snatched her up from UCLA. She is the soul and the brain behind our curriculum that answers teens' texts at 2 o'clock in the morning, if that's when they text her. So I'm privileged to welcome you both, ladies. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Wisse, it is such an honor to have you here. I want you to know on a personal note, when I was in graduate school, I read your work. And precisely in 2007, when your book, Jews in Power, came out, it really ruffled everyone in Jewish studies. And just as Masha said, even though people vehemently may have disagreed, there was a tremendous amount of respect for your book, and I really remember it. And I'm glad that we are revisiting this book today. So I'm just going to start by asking the following. Why did you write this book? Take us through it. Why did you write Jews in Power?
Well, first, let me thank you. I'm very grateful for the existence of Club Z and for your work in it. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to express my thanks to you through this interview, which I hope will be helpful. Well, the question is always hard to answer because we don't know our own motives sometimes, but I can tell you how it seems to me I came to write it. In our family, which was not very observant, the Passover holiday was observed very strictly, and particularly the 2 nights of the Seder, when you read through the Passover Haggadah completely. And doing this as a child, one became more and more aware of some of the words and the meaning of some of the words. And the passage that really always struck everyone very forcefully was the passage that said, V'hisha amda, for it is not only one force that stood up against us to destroy us. In every generation, they stand up against us to destroy us. And the Holy One, blessed be he, saves us from their hand. Now, of course, the Haggadah itself tells the story of how the Jews came from Egypt to liberation. And here was a passage which said, no, this did not happen only once. In every generation, they come to destroy us. Well, in our family, in the 1940s and 50s, when my parents had lost so many members of their family and friends and their whole communities had been destroyed, you can imagine that the words that meant the most to the people around the table were, and the Holy One, blessed be he, saves us from their hands. So people were very disturbed, bothered by the fact that, in fact, God had not come to our great assistance. But even as a child, I somehow knew this was not my problem. God works in his own mysterious ways, and I couldn't really address that mystery. But what did interest me was this question of, in every generation, they come. Well, yes and no, I thought to myself. This is not exact, because yes, in my generation, we fled from both the Soviets and the Nazis, and there were the Arabs already attacking Israel. So it was true that there were attackers in every generation. However, we were living in Canada, and then I knew that south of us was the United States of America, and nobody there was standing against us. So at that point, I began to think that this is a really serious and interesting political problem. I don't want to stop it in every generation, and I don't really agree with this. Everyone hates the Jews and everyone is, I don't find that extremely helpful. What I find helpful is the question of why do certain societies, why do certain leaders choose to stand against the Jews and feel that they have to destroy us? That's the question. And that is really why I wrote Jews in Power. The question that I was asking in the book, what is the political reason? How do the Jews become this people that so many forces want to destroy? Why does that happen? How does that happen? And in my own way, to just try to explain it.
Right. I understand what you're saying. So it's interesting. So your book, in fact, is a book about Jews in power, but it's getting at the question of anti-Semitism through that, which brings me to, I think that one of the major concepts in your book is that when Jews lost sovereignty, they were catapulted into the world in the diaspora. So are you arguing, therefore, that the answer to stymie anti-Semitism is the return of Jewish sovereignty?
Well, it's not at all. If it were as simple as that, then, that is really the crux of some Zionist thinkers, that the reason that Jews were attacked in so many different ways and by so many different forces is because they were spread out among the nations, that the diaspora is the problem, and going back to Zionism is the solution. However, may I point out, and I do in my book as well, if that were the solution, why would Club Z have to exist? If it were just a question of having to recover sovereignty in the land of Israel, well, one has recovered sovereignty in the land of Israel. So how is this cycle not ended? So it wasn't a sufficient answer at all. And so I began to really look a little deeper. And the first part of my book really has to do with how the Jewish people came to be able to live among the nations for 2,000 years. I mean, that at least is one of the greater mysteries. There isn't a case of another people like the Jews that is formed in a country that remains loyal to the return to that country, that is able to preserve its way of life in Eastern countries, in Western countries, under dictatorships, in conditions of freedom. I mean, it's an astonishing story. So what is the power behind the Jews? And one of the keys to it that I found is, seems to me quite curious. It starts with the first exile in Babylon. The temple was destroyed. And since you're a teacher of Jewish history and the students, this wonderful student who said that she had gained so much from Club Z, since they know something about Jewish history, you know that the great destructions were the destructions of the temple. And the Book of Lamentations, which really tells us how horrific that destruction was. So there are the Jews exiled in Babylon. And what do? They do not dissolve themselves, as so many people do when they're conquered. No, they don't. The idea is that they don't see that the Babylonians defeated them. Now, this may sound extremely weird. What does it mean? The Babylonians defeated them. They're in exile in Babylon. The Babylonians in Psalm 137 are saying, sing us your songs of Zion, making fun of them. And the Jews say, we can't. How can we sing in this, in this land of exile? But so I realized that what the Jews realized is that it wasn't that Babylon had defeated them. It was that they had once entered into a contractual agreement with God at Sinai. And God had said to them, if you obey my commandments, if you live the Jewish way of life according to the way it's set out, I will protect you. And if you don't, then you will be destroyed among the nations. So when they are defeated by Babylon, they don't say to themselves, Babylon defeated us. They say, we failed in our obligations. And as soon as we can prove ourselves once again, God will protect us. He will return us to the land. And this is what the prophets say. So my point is there that they develop a triangular rather than a binary description of power. Other nations say, I defeat you or you defeat me. It's a one against the other. But the Jews say, if we are defeated by X, Y, or Z, it's because we have not lived up to the obligations of the source of power. So that gives the Jews the ability to carry this idea of God and power with them forever. As the Haggadah tells us, for in every generation they will come to defeat us, but we will prove ourselves so that God will save us. So that's really, I would say, what gave the Jews that ability to sustain themselves according to the Jewish way of life, which is remarkable, through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Correct. In fact, that is a very strong point that you make in the book, is that when Jews each time lose their sovereignty, they don't attribute the problem to the Babylonians or the Romans. It's them. They didn't, it's an internal problem. It's a question of Jewish self-accountability, self-criticism, desire to always perfect themselves. And yes, that could be an explanation for survivability. But I also have to tell you that, here in America, looking at American Jewry, I think it's almost, it's a double-edged sword, if you will. It really has contributed to a problem where a Jewish community is always apologizing. It's this bowing down, kneeling down. I don't know if you remember this summer, Jewish communities are very uncomfortable with Jews and power. They're very uncomfortable to claim that we have power, we are successful people. In turn, and instead, they go to this extreme, very extreme case that I don't know if really it is helping in our survival. So can you talk a little bit about the extreme of that self-flagellation, if you will?
Yes, well, you've hit it on. I think that you've defined it exactly, that it has its strength, but obviously that's one of its liabilities, because America has a very similar problem, by the way. America is a democracy, which means that it accepts its self-accountability. That is to say, we are accountable for everything that has gone wrong. If I may switch a little bit from our subject, just think of what is happening in America today. It's such a similar situation, because it too has this democratic structure, by which I mean that ultimately the Democrats and the Republicans between the parties, understand that they are the ones responsible. So America does not blame others for its problem. It takes the thing about it. Comes a movement and says, you enslaved us, you stole this land, you did this, and that self-accountability turns into a kind of phony guilt, and it turns into a collapse of moral self-confidence, and it is incapable of defending itself. And so, to return to our people, This is, in fact, the danger of the situation. The danger of the situation, but in the Jewish case, it comes a little bit before that. As long as one believed in the ultimate power of God, and by power in this case, I think Jews really meant the intervention of God in history. My book really begins in the modern period, where the problem is that Jews, even those who believe in God, don't really believe in the miracle of his actual intervention militarily on their behalf. And so one really comes to the realization that, yes, we have internalized this idea of self-accountability, but we must now internalize the fact that we are responsible for our own self-protection. It's not that we don't believe in the God who gave us the laws at Sinai. It's not that we don't believe that this is the greatest civilization that a people can possibly have created for themselves. And I really, it's not that I'm pounding myself on the chest, but I really do think that Jewish civilization is extraordinary in what it has achieved, and that the Bible and the Talmud and the Jewish way of life have proven their value over and over again. But we now know that we are also responsible for our self-defense. And that means that you have to see the evil in your destroyers. You have to recognize not the evil in yourself only, that you're accountable for, but you must never confuse the evils in yourself with the far greater evils of those who are trying to destroy you. Now, that's very hard for a minority that has no incentive to harm others, to suddenly have to say to yourself, those people are destroyers. They don't like the Jewish way of life. They don't believe in coexistence. They don't believe in toleration of minorities. They will really seek power in different ways. And since they do, and since we do not consider that the good, we have to learn in a very painful way how to expose them, how in a sense to withstand them, and in some cases how to defeat them, because our existence is very important. What we stand for is we dare not allow them to defeat us. And this requires, as you see, a completely different set of abilities, not just the ability to know where we went wrong, but the ability to know where we go right and where others go wrong.
Right. I have to tell you, on a personal note, being in the role of educator, working with so many teens, I'll just give you an anecdotal story. A lot of our teens encounter Free Palestine. They post something, let's say Shabbat Shalom, and somebody writes Free Palestine. On one of the sessions, I showed them a video of a man in New York walking around a Jewish store and forcing Jews in the store. On his phone, it said Free Palestine, to say Free Palestine. And many of my students want to attribute the best, that they don't know that these people are not really anti-Semitic. These people, and I think what you said right now is very important. Yes, we have to have self-accountability, but we also have to hold that same accountability for those who want to destroy us. Free Palestine is a call for the destruction of Israel.
That's right.
So as a fellow educator, what advice do you give to educators who don't want to talk about Free Palestine? You have no idea how many times I go to conferences and give talks on that slogan, what is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Jewish educators, Israel educators telling me, oh, Naya, you're being alarmist. This is not what, I mean, what advice do you give to all of us? Because, Jews do carry this kind of heavy weight on their shoulders because they have the history of the lacrimose narrative, the history of trauma, the catastrophes. And so are we seeing, is Free Palestine Am I correct in my assessment of Free Palestine? Am I being alarmist? What are your thoughts of that? Because this is the issue of the day.
I understand that. It's an issue that it's been piling up for a very, very long time. And to, to take a movement that has been growing and that now has social media as one of its tools, which, by the way, Hitler and Stalin never had to this effect. So you understand that the modern anti-Jewish movement has tools in its toolbox, which are much more powerful than the tools that other dictatorships and other totalitarian forces had. So what does one do? Well, first you have to understand the problem. That's one of the things we're trying to do here. It's one of the things that you try to do as an educator, and one of the reasons I wrote this book. You can't solve a problem if you don't really understand it. So understanding it is important. However, understanding it doesn't yet mean to say that you know how to deal with it. And so your question is really very well put. First of all, I would say the map. I always come back to that. The map, the map, the map. For your own reasons, you can never persuade someone who doesn't want to be persuaded. And there's no point getting into an argument with people who can, who have this fixation in their mind. However, for oneself and in a classroom, and where there are people who can be persuaded, you have to have the map of the Middle East. And you have to have at your fingertips these things. Oh, really? Here's Egypt, 360,000 square miles. Here is Syria, da-da-da-da. Here is Saudi Arabia. Do you know that these are the nations who refused the Jews their land? And then they turned around and they accused Jews of refusing the Palestinians their land. You say to people, look, what you want to do is to substitute this little map of your imagination, this evil little map, for the really big map. I won't have it, and I won't allow you to do it, because this is false, this is wicked, and this does not help the people who are in all those countries, who are obviously benighted. Why do they have to organize their politics? Why should Muslim politics, why should the politics of 1.8 billion people and these hundreds and hundreds, these millions of Arabs, why should they be fixated on destroying the Jewish state? Is that helpful to them? You point out, by the way, all the functions of anti-Semitism. Why do they do it? Very simply, they are a people that needs to organize their politics against. They want to blame others for what is going wrong in their societies. You write out all the functions of anti-Semitism, which are all, by the way, the functions that will ultimately destroy any society that uses them. So in your heart, whether you're able to convince others or not, we know, this is not lying to ourselves, we know that the minute Germany adopted anti-Semitism and tried to blame the Jews for everything that was wrong with modernity and with liberalism and so forth, it signed its own death certificate. That happens in the Soviet Union, that happened to countries like Romania or Hungary, and it definitely happens to the Palestinians, which, by the way, have become, the most pathological people that ever existed, because there were other people who tried to destroy the Jews, but there is no other people that tries to become the Jews, that takes the Jewish moment of self-liberation, the great creation of the state of Israel, and turns that into its national tragedy, that says their land.
Nakba is the Nakba is the tragedy of the Jewish state.
That's right, it turns it into its own tragedy. And what's more, look at the difference between, do you know that the Arabs of Palestine, not so long ago, were considered the most advanced people, the most advanced group of Arabs in the Middle East, the most literate, the most capable. And we know that there are very many Palestinians who actually devote themselves to things like medicine and to things like teaching, who actually are able to develop vaccines, who would be able to win Nobel Prizes. You think that innately the Semites, the Palestinians, the Arabs of the Middle East could not compete with the Jews in their accomplishments? Do we think that the Jews are somehow, innate? I don't think that the Jews are innately better. It's just that our culture is so much better. Our culture is so much healthier. I won't say better. And what we have done by encouraging the fact that we still allow for this idea of, oh, we have displaced the Palestinians, oh, they are refugees, oh, we are responsible for them in some particular, we allow them to be infantilized, and we allow them to become this people that is devoted to destruction. So look at these two societies side by side. Israel flourishing, Israel every moment really creating new things, dynamic. People consider themselves happy if they're left alone to live. The education system flourishes. By the way, the health system is a model to the world, and many other things as well. Creative people devoted to creation, side by side with a people that's devoted to nothing but destruction. So anyone who uses this motto of Palestine is really not just calling for the destruction. I wouldn't say that they're calling for the destruction of the Jews. They're calling for the destruction of the Arabs. That's the society that is being destroyed. And every time that one goes along with this narrative of theirs, you are really helping them to dig their own graves and the graves of their children and of their grandchildren. It has got to really be pushed back. And I think that we have to be the ones who lead this education, re-educate. We have to do something about it because it is being directed against us. We have no incentive for wanting to be against anyone. We just want to be accepted by those who are against us. But you have to develop the skill to do it for their sake, let's say.
Okay. I want to come back to you said something which is very important. You said that, look, it's not just about the anti-Semitism. It's not just about the Jews. When when Nazi Germany adopted anti-Semitism as policy, it was the end of Germany. Same thing with Soviet Union. That this idea that Jews are the canary in the coal mine, that the anti-Semitism is really a barometer, a test of the health of a society. And which brings me to a very difficult question, a question that gives me a lot of grief. I came to this country when I was 6 years old from the former Soviet Union. Actually, many people who work at Club Z are former Soviet. There's a reason for it.
I do know.
We came here because of this unique Judeo-Christian country, this unique project in world history. And I'm watching it fold. I really am. And people who are fighting, let's say, critical race theory, or people who are fighting the radical left vis-a-vis BLM, they're focusing on, the anti-Semitic problem. But the anti-Semitic problem is just, that's not the problem. The problem is it's anti-West, anti-Judeo-Christian. And I'm genuinely worried for America. I understand you're not a seer, I'm not a seer, prophets, but can we separate this? Is there still hope for America? Is there a liberal democratic America? Or is the moderate left gone? Are we talking about a radical America? I mean, I am genuinely very worried.
Well, I'll respond to all your concerns, only to say that you see what happens when you voice your concerns as you have done so accurately. This is already, to me, a hopeful sign. Now, you may say, well, this is ridiculous. Just what? Because we all say oy vey, or, wow, this is so terrible. That should make me hopeful. No, it's not the fact that you are tearing your hair out. It's the fact that you have accurately described, firstly, the connection between anti-Jewish and anti-American, which is exactly one and the same. the people who are against, who are saying free Palestine, are the same people who are saying white supremacy. And so these two things are inseparable. So the Jewish kids who are fighting now for the legitimacy and for the dignity and for the rightness of the state of Israel are fighting just as hard for America, for the American way of life, for the Bill of Rights, for the Constitution, for this extraordinary country. Now, democracy, unlike Judaism, democracy is very young. The thickness of American society is very young. So I would say, in our calculation, the Jews have a much better chance at long-range survival than America does. That's number one. I know it's horrific to think of it, but it's just the case. However, the number of Jews who survive compared to the number of Jews who exist has always been much too small. 2 tribes out of 12. We lose a great many people in the process, which we cannot afford to do. So the fight that one is waging to re-educate people about the importance of standing up for the civilization that means so much, and to think of how you do it. And as that young woman said, to learn to speak, to learn why this is so important. I don't think that there is a more important task, but I would always go back to emphasizing that one does it not so much only for oneself, because every time you do that for Israel and for the Jews, you are ipso facto doing it for American self-confidence and saying that, listen, this is not true. This nation was not born out of slavery. It had slavery in it, but of course it was born as a reaction to slavery, and it freed itself from slavery. And what you have to emphasize is what the Haggadah emphasizes. You don't stop telling the story halfway. The reason you tell the story of slavery is not to talk about slavery. You begin with slavery in order to show how amazing it was that you were able to overcome this, to leave it behind you, to build such a remarkable, and then to celebrate what you have. You have to get to the point of joy. You have to get to the point of really moral self-confidence. Psychologically, you have to be self-confident. You have to be able to be proud of what you are, happy. I would always come back to this image. It's wonderful to fight, which is what we're talking about, to learn how to do it effectively. But one has to do that with a sense of joy and of knowing why we so much appreciate what it is that we're fighting for.
Honestly, that's a very good reminder, because, I myself sometimes find myself in a lot of darkness because I'm always fighting this. I'm fighting darkness. I believe, and I tell my students, our students at Club C, that when we fight anti-Semitism correctly, we are shining light. We are shining light to the actual injustices of the world. And so we forget that. And I think that's very, very, it's a good thing to remind ourselves of. I know we have a lot of questions from the audience. I need to ask you another question, which is very important for me to find out. You and I corresponded a bit, and I asked you about living in a post-Zionist moment. And you had said, no, it's not that we're living in a post-Zionist moment. You said we are living in a supremely Zionist moment. I want to go back to what you said, which was, well, if it was as simple as what the Zionists, Jabotinsky and the such had wanted, which is the answer to diaspora is sovereignty, and it seems that that's not the answer. Can you talk about why we're not living in a post-Zionist moment? What does it mean to you, supremely Zionist?
Well, it's hard to lay that all out, but I would simply say that, the question of Zionism ought to have been laid to rest in some way, and was laid to rest for all time. What I would compare it with is this. Before the creation of the State of Israel, when the Zionist movement started up in Europe, and started before Herzl, it was very clear why it started for two reasons. One is because it was time for the Jews to return to their homeland. This was a time of emerging nation states, dozens and dozens of emerging nation states. So when other nation states were actually forming in this way, there was, I mean, it was the most logical thing. If Italy was doing it, if Ireland was doing it, if India was doing it, then of course the Jews at the time had come. We had always said that we were going to return to Zion. We had always thought that maybe there would be some miraculous intervention, but we always knew that we would return to Zion. So now that people were really taking fate and action into their own hands more and more, solving their own problems more and more, it was time for the Jews to return. Anti-Semitism was the other side of that, because what Herzl saw, by the way, was so important. Herzl didn't, to my mind, when Herzl saw the mobs of Paris shouting against the Jewish so-called traitor who had been framed, shouting against Dreyfus, right? Saying death to the Jews in Paris, where 100 years earlier, the French Revolution had declared liberty, fraternity. He was devastated. You know why? It wasn't only that he wanted to save the Jews. He wanted to save France. He wanted to save liberalism. And he felt the only way to do this is to take this hatred of the Jews, this offensive aspect of France, out of France, to show them the Jews, you know, are really a nation like all others. And that would really, as it were, denazify or de-anti-Semitize, or, you know, re-liberalize French society. And both these things are true. One, that it was a time for the Jews to affirm themselves, and the other, that it was a great danger to the idea of liberalism, to have within Europe a force that so clearly was anti-liberal. Right? Anti-Semitism was the most anti-liberal force. It's an expression of anti-liberalism. You can substitute anti-liberalism for anti-Semitism. Here's what I wanted to get at, though. Before the creation of the state of Israel, what I would compare it with is if we're married and we're thinking of, should we have a child? That's a fair debate people have. Of course, there's a real value to having a child, but some couples don't want to, so they don't have a child. All right. But after the child is born, if you do not care for this child and keep it alive, that's infanticide. Mm-hmm. If you want to kill it. That's the difference. Mm-hmm. Before Zionism created the state of Israel, you could say, should we not, or whatever. You could argue other points of view. After the creation, to question the existence of Israel for 1 millisecond, how dare anyone on the planet question the existence of the state of Israel, the legitimacy of, how dared the Arab League form in 1945, the same year when Hitler went down in his bunker? How dared they organize around the idea of destroying this newly created state of Israel with whom they were expected to coexist because they were all members of the United Nations? So that's what I mean by, I mean, Zionism has proven itself 1,000 times over in the nature of the state of Israel. It doesn't have to prove itself. It has to hold other nations accountable to really coming up to its, I would say, ankles in their degree of civilized behavior and behavior towards other countries.
Very powerful. Of course, I'd love to take my own questions more, but we have a few. No, we have quite a few. So here we go. It's unfair to me not to do this. So here we go. We have a question from Bob, and here's his question. How do we reconcile those Jews, especially younger ones, who support Israel, but also are support anti-Western movements like BLM and Antifa? What do we say to these Jews? The Jews who support BLM, the Jews who support Antifa, and they also supposedly support Israel. Yeah. What do we say to these people, these
Oh,
Jews?
look, what does one say to them? What one says to them is what one is able to say to them. We all have different languages. We all have different children. You have to find the tools. You know how that is in a class of students. This student may require this kind of answer. This student may require that kind of answer. I would only say that Jews who do not stay within the tradition of Judaism, but who pretend to like others. Do you know that Jews were involved in the murder of the Tsarist family? There they went in there, Jews. They went in there and they shot, these people. Jews can be murderers when they become devotees of things like Black Lives Matter and murderous movements, which are worse than Black Lives Matter. So there is no choice. It's impossible. You can't be, you can't be both what you are and anti what you are. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew, and somewhere or other, a Jew has to be responsible to what Judaism actually teaches, not, by the way, what Judaism can be twisted to mean, but what Judaism actually teaches. And it does not, Judaism, and by the way, there is, this gentleman obviously knows that there is a difference between leftism and Judaism. It is true that Judaism has within itself a very, very strong element of, let's say, belief in social justice. It has within it a very strong egalitarian longing. That is to say, we know how much attention is paid to charity and to people mutual self-help and so forth, and rescuing people who are slaves. And I mean, this is really part of Judaism. When it is a holistic part of the Jewish tradition, then that is a liberality and a liberalism that one would entirely encourage. But when it comes at the expense of the Jews, or when it is outside Judaism, and when it becomes a political movement in itself, and you call that the movement, and you say that I'm a Jew, but my real identity is really to bring social justice through these other avenues, through political means entirely, well, then you've chosen a different way. And I would call that a kind of conversion without a formal conversion. The United States, you see, is very accommodating in that way. You can become a Christian, but would that it would be a Christian. I mean, people who convert to Christianity move into a different framework, which can be also a very strong framework. But people who convert into left-wing politics and are actually converts because their principles, their values, their movement, their organizations are all the organizations of a left-wing political movement. And oh yeah, incidentally, somewhere in the background, they're Jews. No, they've converted.
No, but sometimes they say it's because we're Jews.
Yes, well, it isn't.
It's this rhetorical trope. As Jews, we must embrace. As Jews, we must. It's
understood, but they're not. I mean, I would say it's just very simple. They're not. And I mean, here is something. I think that the Chabad movement, for example, an example, is wonderful in its own way. It says every Jew is family, and it really welcomes into its, into its orbit and into its houses anyone who wants to come in and to be as they are. But you notice that Chabad does not pretend to be anything but what it is. So you can say that you are what you are, but when you come into this house, this is who we are. I think one has to begin to think of Judaism like that. Judaism is not silly putty. It's not silly putty. It's not elastic to the breaking point. And you can say what you wish. I can say that I'm a ballet dancer. Yes, here I am. I am a ballet dancer. Why not? I can be anything that I want to be. It just simply isn't the case that I'm a ballet dancer. And it just simply isn't the case that they are good Jews. They were born Jews. That's true. I can't deny that. And there's part of them that they may still identify as Jews. But to say that they are that because they are Jews, this is to falsify Judaism. It's to pretend that Judaism is what it is not.
It's quite a statement, and I do agree with you, but it is, it's quite a statement to make, but I agree with you,
There's hard to say, sure, it's easy to say, you're saying. And
right. Well, listen, this idea of Jews wanting to be part of these progressive spaces, and I hear this a lot. Naya, I'm implored to believe we must have a say in the progressive space. Once we make Israel partisan, once we make anti-Semitism partisan, we are done. I also say that Jews have a disease of optics. No other minority is as concerned of optics as the Jews. And I'll give you this example. I just was reading Menachem Begin's biography by Daniel Gordis, and he talks about how during the Eichmann trial, a major Jewish organization, was vehemently opposed to having Eichmann being tried in Jerusalem because it would then mean to the world that we see the Holocaust as a Jewish issue. But the Holocaust, argued this organization, is a universal crime against humanity. I think you and I agree.
Yes, we do. We do.
It's of optics.
Well, it's more than optics. It's more than optics. I mean, you have to take into account what the situation of the Jews as a people, an American Jewry, what the situation is. You're under assault. Well, it is very hard. First of all, it is hard to be the target of constant disinformation. So notice, we are the targets of disinformation. What do you do if day after day you are the targets of disinformation? You know how difficult that is? I mean, this is a problem that you see everybody faces if you're charged with something and that doesn't attend to you, but try to make your case, in a world that is. So this is number one. We have to learn how patiently, you need education, you need authority, you need all kinds of things. You need Club Z magnified to 1,000% to really push back against disinformation. That's only the beginning, because it is hard to be the target of defamation, which you are constant. That's different from disinformation. It's part of it, but it's defamation. You think, Levin, he wrote a wonderful book. He's a psychoanalyst. And he wrote a book comparing the Jews to the battered child syndrome. Kenneth Levin, right? The battered child syndrome. Now, this is very provocative because I don't like to talk about politics in psychoanalytic terms, but it is something of that kind. The battered child wants so badly to be loved by the person who is battering it, and is sometimes desperate to win the affection of those who hate it the most and who abuse it the most. There is that element within the Jew. And I think it's worthwhile recognizing that problem and saying, yes, we have to see ourselves in a distorted mirror. We have to see ourselves in the eyes of people who are against us. And yet, through all that, we have to remain who we are, strongly who we are, reinforcing. Well, the only way to do that is to go out there and to teach who you are and to insist on who you are, and also to challenge them at every single step. And one more thing about what you're saying, which is perhaps the most important. You see, what anti-Semitism is, it's making Jews the subject. And I've sometimes compared that to a magician. Who's, how magician works. A magician says, look at this, and he gets the whole audience looking at this. And of course, the hand that's doing the magic is the hand that you're not watching. So what anti-Semitism is, it's the pointing finger that says, look at them, Look at them. They are wrong. Look at Israel. Look at Israel. Look at the Jews. Look at Israel. Well, if you look at Israel, they will be found guilty. The only way to do it is to say, I'm sorry, I'm not the subject. You're the subject. I am not the defendant. I'm the prosecutor. You are the defendant. You're the one who is wrong. I am putting you in the defendant's box. I am not going to answer to your phony charge, right? And this is very hard to do, but this is what has to be done. We love to talk about ourselves, and you're different from other groups, but other groups say, let's get together and let's have a discussion about Zionism. Well, what happens is that, these Jews get together and they say the left says against the right and the right says, oh, how wonderful. We can discuss from today to tomorrow. We have agreed, in a sense, to make ourselves the subject. No, when we get together on this subject, we have to talk about them. What is it that is going to drive back? You see, there are many Arab and Muslim immigrants to the United States of America, many teachers or some teachers of Middle Eastern studies who are really very fine people and who want to become great Americans, and they don't like this any more than we do. But there are a great many more who just revel in it. They have brought the war against Israel into the United States of America. They dare not be allowed to get away with it. As we said before, for America's sake.
You hit the nail on the head. I want to invite back Masha into this conversation, the founder of this fearless organization, to also add depth and perspective. Masha.
Thank you, Naichka. Professor Wisse, again, thank you so much. We have received many questions and many comments, and I would like to end with, I'm going to paraphrase one of our other alumni who is also, you're teaching at Tikva, and he is a student at Tikva Fund. And what he recently shared is that I'm not a Zionist because I want to fight BDS. I am not a Zionist because I want to stand up for Jewish rights. I'm not a Zionist because I want to protect the Jewish homeland. I'm a Zionist because I'm a Jew, and that's inseparable. And that is what we have to work on. I want every single Jewish youngster, right after their bar mitzvahs, to go and to understand and internalize that American Jews are having this renaissance only because Israel is powerful. We have to have power to govern ourselves as a people, as a nation, and as individuals. And only with that can we bring tikkun olam in the sense that our well-meaning but sorely miseducated compatriots are. And I do want to tell you that the map of the Middle East is hanging in every clubhouse that we have in Brooklyn and in the Bay Area. And it is something that we do every session where we pull out a map and we'll look at it. And there is a very famous Russian anecdote where a really bad student sitting in the back of the classroom in Soviet Union, and he's listening to his teacher go on and on and on how bad Israel is, how horrible it is, how much occupying how much land it occupies. And this really bad, D student raises his hand and asks, Ms. Ivanov, where is Israel exactly on that map? I can't quite see all this occupation. And so
that's good. Yes, that's wonderful. No, I really, let me repeat that it's a great pleasure to know of your being there, and what you've done, I think, is extraordinary, and more power to you and to your fellow teachers and to your students, and maybe Club Z grow.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.